The process mindset is recognizing the flow of life, like the flow of the river. There's that saying, you can't step in the same river twice. I read something that said you can't even step in the same river once, because there's no instant that it's the same. And life is very much like that. It's always moving, always evolving. When we can learn to get in that flow, even in the hard times, even in the deepest valley, we can learn to get into the flow of that, to accept the process. And I can recognize that the valley is the path to the peak. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Gentle Parents Unite podcast special episode. Every week in our membership space that Sujai and I host, I give a weekly group coaching call. And in that coaching call, I give a talk first on some aspect of gentle parenting. This week, I talked about being okay with things not being okay. And what a difficult thing that is, and also essential on the gentle parenting path, because life is challenging and our kids are always going to do things that are difficult. And so being okay with that so that we can be emotionally regulated and work with them is so important. So I'm sharing the talk that I gave with you. This is what we do every week. And if you'd like to join us in our membership group so that you can take part in the coaching calls and take part in these talks, we'd love to see you over there. Just go to www.gentleparentsunite.com/membership. And you can sign up there for a very reasonable fee, and you can join in all our live events, coaching calls, live classes, meditations, and it's a beautiful group. So we'd love to see you over there, and I hope you enjoy this talk, and I wish you all the best on your parenting path. Hi everybody, and welcome to our weekly coaching call. Before we start our coaching part of the call, I usually give a talk on something gentle parenting related. And today I'm going to talk about something called being okay with things not being okay. And it's a challenging one for sure. And it's also, I think, something really, really important on the parenting path, especially the gentle, conscious parenting path. Because we are human beings, we are human, surprise, surprise. And we can forget that sometimes. We're human beings, and as human beings, we're fallible, we're flawed, we're wounded. We have complex systems to navigate, complex communication patterns to navigate. Different people have different cultures. They grow up in different ways. We have different socioeconomic, ethnic, gender, sexuality things going on. There's so many different things. Our neurology is very diverse. Our relationship to our senses is diverse. Our histories, so much, right? It's a complicated thing. Just one individual on their own is a very complicated system, complex system. And then you get two individuals together. You have two complex systems that form an even more complex system. And because each of us affects each other quite significantly, because we're all interconnected, then that system becomes very challenging to navigate. And then when you get a group of people together, it's a lot of challenge, right? And then when that group is under the umbrella of some kind of system that has expectations and rules and a desired outcome or a goal, then there's another level of complexity. So there's a lot of complexity to being human. And because of that, life is hard. And on top of that, of course, we have our emotional natures, which to a greater or lesser degree affect us, right? And so some of us have our emotions are very present with us. Some of us, they're more repressed. But in any case, whether it's repressed or it's, extremely expressed, and we don't have that balance necessarily, which, a few people have a really solid, centered emotional balance all the time, it makes life really hard. And then you have external circumstances, that make life really hard as well. Challenging relationships, maybe a challenging partner, challenging parents, challenging work, challenging financial situations. So there's all sorts of things that make life really challenging, which means a lot of the time, things are going to not be okay. Things are going to be difficult. And then our kids, they are developing beings, right? They're learning so many complex things. They're learning language, and they're learning social structures and social norms and communication, and they're learning how the body works, and they're learning to navigate the particular system of the family that they're in. And then they're learning to navigate siblings if there are any, and they're learning to navigate their peers and other adults and the school system if they're engaging with that. And they're learning how their own body works and what it's all about. And then they're learning just their relationship with themselves, their thoughts, and how the world works. And because they're developing so much, then their understanding and experience of the world is constantly changing. And so kids are having like epiphanies and mental, emotional, developmental leaps all the time. And that can be really overwhelming. And also on top of that, they have this whole emotional nature that grows and grows throughout time. And they don't always rarely have all of the tools and capacity to manage the big, big emotions that a developing brain has. And of course, they're engaging in all of this complexity as well with a lot less experience than we have. And, with all of our experiences, challenging at the best of times. And then on top of that, all of us, we're animals. Yes, we're humans, but we're human animals. We're slightly more evolved animals, perhaps, than other animals, because we have cell phones and cars and buildings and the internet now. But but we're still animals, very much animals. And there's a whole animal part of us. One of my sayings is a skyscraper is as natural as a bird's nest. We are nature. We're not separate from nature as much as we often think we are. And we are nature. What's happening to us is nature. Doesn't mean it's cooperating with the earth, of course. Most of, or at least a lot of what we do isn't. But I think that's part of nature. That's part of us, because we all, as animals, we are also evolving. So it's not like, it's 2021 and evolution has stopped because we're so smart. That's not how it works. We're still evolving. And so there's part of us that's still in process, that's evolving to something. This is what happens. This is what evolution is about. We're adapting and changing as the world changes. And then on top of that, I'm sorry to add all this. I'm sure I'm making everybody stressed and depressed, which is not my intention. but I just want to get a clear picture of why it's valid that we struggle so much, right? And why life can be really difficult. And so on top of that, technologically and societally and the way our whole world is kind of structured has evolved so much in the last couple of 100 years that it outpaces previous known natural evolutions. We're progressing at such a fast rate that what often would take a few thousand years for an organism to develop and adapt to its surroundings, or even a few hundred generations or something, within like 3 or 4 or 5 generations, we're having to adapt with things that are way past what normally would happen according to the natural evolution that happens on the planet. And so we're playing catch up with a brain that's older, meant to deal with things that are much older, much more, much different than what we're actually presented with. I don't know if I explained that very well. And so there's a whole lot of stuff that exists in our lives, around our lives, that creates a lot of pressure for us. And this is why a lot of the time in life, and I did a whole talk on this a while back, and I posted it so you can find it. A lot of the time in life, we go through alternating waves of peaks and valleys. Sometimes we're at a peak, and that peak can last for a while, where things are going well, we're connected with our kids, everyone's cooperating. But then that can kind of fall apart, and when we go through a valley, things are difficult and stressful. And our kids maybe are going through developmental stuff, we're going through emotional stuff, mental health stuff, wellness stuff. And so then things get really difficult. And of course, because all of us affect each other, like my saying, every part of the system affects every other part of the system. If one person in the family system is struggling, everyone else gets affected by that, which is natural. And so when our kids are going through difficult times, when they're going through challenging things, it can be very, very challenging for us. Because number one, we have all of this pressure that I just talked about. And number two, we get afraid of it. We want to fix it. We want to solve it. It's hard for us. So like when your kid hits somebody, or one parent was feeling like their kid was acting like a bully, another one was talking about their kid going to a play school and hurting other kids and feeling really bad about it. And so we all go through those kind of things, and those valleys can last a while sometimes. They can wear at our souls, wear at our spirits, wear at our sense of hope, and even make us question the goodness of the world a lot of the time. I've certainly gone through that, and so then when our kids are having a hard time and exhibiting behaviors that are really challenging, it can be really, really hard for us. And we can feel defeated. We can feel hopeless. We can feel helpless. And we can feel like nothing's ever going to change. Nothing's ever going to get better. And so I want to talk a little bit about how can we reframe those moments with our kids so that they don't feel so defeating. Because they happen a lot, especially with the little ones, because they're developing and changing and dealing with so much. They happen a lot. Our kids are going to make lots of mistakes, are going to behave in ways that we wish they wouldn't, that aren't in alignment with the values we want to teach them. They're not always going to appear to be the beings that we want them to be and that we know they are on the inside. But what appears on the outside often isn't that, right? And so we want to, how can we deal with those moments so we don't panic, we don't feel defeated, we don't feel like everything's lost, and we lose ourselves in that, and we lose our connection with our kids, and we lose that sense of seeing their beauty and their light and their goodness. So let's talk about that a little bit. So one thing is, when we become parents, we often bring with us a lot of expectations for how things are going to go. We may have picked up those expectations from many different places. We may have picked them up from our childhood, of course, our own childhood, how we were treated, the expectations that were placed on us, maybe expectations that we were unable to fulfill, or maybe unwilling to fulfill because they weren't fair, and or unwilling or unable to because they didn't match up with our capacity. And so then we have, but still those expectations, they stick in our nervous system, in our body, in our mind, in our mental patterns, emotional patterns, relational patterns. And so then these expectations, we place them like a lens over our children. And what happens is whenever our kid is outside of that expectation, it almost physically hurts, it hurts us. And it's very challenging, and then it makes us very tense. It makes us full of fear and anger and sometimes panic and shame, all sorts of things, wrongness. Another reason that we respond to those expectations and our children's behavior is when we end up feeling concerned about what others will think of us, right? Caring about what others will think of us, fear of being ostracized, of being judged, of being a bad parent, especially if we already feel like we're bad parents, which I think all of us do at one time or another, if not a lot of the time. This is why in the early days of my parenting, I just said, okay, Vivek, you're a bad parent, just accept it. There's nothing you can do about it. Just do your best. You can't do better than that anyways. And now I tell people to don't think of yourselves as a good parent or a bad parent. Think of yourself as an evolving parent. But honestly, in the early days, I just thought I'm just going to think of myself as a bad parent and not stress about it because I can't do better than that. But what that did help me do was it freed me from the judgment, and I was able to just concentrate on doing, learning and growing and doing the best that I can. But yeah, caring about that fear of being judged is so difficult. And then, of course, when our kids are acting that way, we do genuinely care about the other people that are being affected by it. You know, maybe they jumped on a kid, maybe they threw sand in their face, and maybe uh, maybe they're crawling over, like pushing a kid, knocking them off the slide, something, right? Or with older kids, it can be different things. We care about that, and I think it's reasonable to care about that, because we do want to care about other people. We don't want to just care about our kids. We want to care about other people too. It's also beautiful modeling to care about other people as well. And so when you take all of those things, it can create a lot of tension around us when our kids don't act in alignment with how we want them to, right? With the expectations, with our hopes and our expectations, both. And then, of course, we catastrophize about the future too. If we don't get a handle on this now, the future is going to be terrible because they're never going to learn. So what do we do with all that? What do we do with all that? Well, so what can we do? First of all, step number one always is to empathize with ourselves, to give ourselves empathy and compassion. It really is number one. It's the number one. It's just the number one. It's the number one practice. It's the number one tool. Number one, really empathize with yourself. But think about all those inputs that are coming to us that cause the intensity that we carry on a day-to-day basis. It's a lot. It's a heavy weight for us to carry. And it's okay for that to be hard. It's okay for it to be difficult, for it to be challenging, for it to be painful. Not only okay, it's inevitable. And when we give ourselves compassion for that, there's a saying that says it feels hard because it is hard. I love that. I wish I had written that one. And I always have that moment of jealousy when I read a good one-liner. I was like, oh, I should have written that one. Because I have so many one-liners. But I love that one because it's an acknowledgement of what is. One of my sayings is, don't let your idea of how things should be interfere with your perception of how things are. And so, the way things are is very hard, and that's okay. And so I can give myself compassion. I say, okay, Vivek, this is really hard right now, and you don't know what the hell you're doing, and you don't know what to do, and when you just did the thing, and it wasn't that great, and that's okay. That's okay. That's gonna it happened before. It's gonna happen again. There's no way around that. Because you're human, you're evolving, you're an animal, you have this big weight, evolution, all this stuff, right? It's going to happen. So there's a certain acceptance in that, right? There's an acceptance of the fact that life is going to be hard sometimes, and then remembering all the stuff about the kids, and having compassion for their experience in that moment. Even if they're the ones jumping on the other kid, even in that moment, to be able to say, of course they're jumping on another kid. They're a kid. This is kind of what they do. This is how they figure stuff out. They're animals themselves, and they're developing animals, at a very early stage of development. And they're dealing with a world that their brains aren't wired for, also because they're also in a stage of evolution and all that stuff, right? And all that stuff, the purpose of that stuff is not to make us feel bad. It's to give us context for being able to give ourselves compassion for why things are hard. And then we can sit because what happens is then you can kind of sit in that challenging experience. You can sit in that pain and go, okay, this isn't wrong. This isn't broken. This is kind of how things are. And I can accept this. This is what I have to work with. This is what I have to work with. I remember years ago, I went to an Alanis Morissette concert, and I loved Alanis Morissette. Jagged Little Pill was the only album I listened to for like a few years, and when she came to Toronto, she played at this outdoor concert where there was something like 10, 15,000 people at this concert, and it was this huge park that she played at, and we got there. Me and my friends got there early. So we could get a nice seat, and we sat not too close to the stage because we didn't want to be in the big, like the big mashy crowd, but we were just past where we thought that would be. And we brought a picnic blanket, and we each sat on one corner of the blanket to kind of like stake out our area. And people were coming in and really squished together, but we had our space. And I remember at the end of the concert, we decided to let everybody leave, and we just sat. And after everybody was gone, everybody had left their trash everywhere. It was terrible. There was trash everywhere. It was like, and because we were sitting on the ground, it was like we were in a sea of garbage. And I remember at that moment thinking, this is really what life is like. We're in a sea of garbage. We just had an ecstatic experience, enjoying our friendship and enjoying this beautiful musician sharing their art form together. So much passion, and the whole audience, 10,000 people, like together celebrating this moment. And then when it was over, it was like just garbage everywhere. And I never forgot that sea of garbage. And I thought, this really is it. It's kind of like that. Life a lot of the time is that combination between the Alanis Morissette concert and the sea of garbage left behind. And there's a certain, and the thing is, in that moment, and I know it's the environmentalist in me doesn't agree with this, but in that moment, I saw that sea of garbage as something beautiful. I saw it as representing the human struggle, and the human struggle is something beautiful because we're struggling towards something, towards harmony, towards togetherness, towards peace, towards something beautiful, something loving, something that where we're all together. But geez, the trip there is hard, right? It's really, really hard. So that's the acceptance part of it. We can accept where we are and who we are, accept the fact that life is hard. It doesn't mean we're not working on it. It's not a acceptance where we aren't engaged in working through stuff. It's not like we're stepping away from it. And in fact, when we accept the fact that life is hard, but it's not an acceptance that then you run away from life for it, or you don't engage with it. It allows us to engage deeper, because we're not running from it. Precisely, we're not running from it. Another part is to have a process. So the acceptance part, which comes from the compassion, comes from the understanding and the empathy that we give ourselves and we give our kids for all that. Another part of it is to practice having that process mindset. The process mindset is when you aren't fixated on the destination, but you recognize every moment is a process. Yes, we have our ideals in mind of where we're headed, where we want to be, what we want our children to be, how we want to walk in the world, the values we want to pass on to them. We don't want our kids to still be jumping on other people's heads when they're 20, and then we notice it when they're 6 or 5 and 4 and 7, and we want to stop it. So we have a vision for what we want, but recognizing that our kids are always in process, and so are we, right? This is the learning mindset, the process mindset. Those two things are very connected. And so when we can really, and so this is the thing, right? In that moment, when our kids are acting in ways that are causing us this kind of stress, and we give ourselves compassion, then we also choose to put ourselves into the process mindset. And this is something you can write on your arm too, or carry a card and whip that card out or something. I don't know, put signs on your wall to have that process mindset. Because when you see your kids as in process rather than acting out or behaving in a certain way, but you see them in process, then they are, in that moment, they are actively learning about life. And we can see this is not the final destination for them. Including the kid that they're stepping on, it's not the final destination for them either. This is their learning process moment as well. Everybody has that moment, and it's always that moment. That's what the process mindset is about. The process mindset is recognizing the flow of life, like the flow of the river. There's that saying, you can't step in the same river twice. I read something that said you can't even step in the same river once, because there's no instant that it's the same. And life is very much like that. It's always moving, always evolving. When we can learn to get in that flow, even in the hard times, even in the deepest valley, we can learn to get into the flow of that, to accept the process. Sometimes when I'm feeling really, 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 really terrible, I feel like I'm at the bottom of a deep, dark lake. In that moment, I can look up and I can imagine the surface and I can imagine the sunlight. And I can recognize that the valley is the path to the peak. And that's the process mindset. It doesn't mean you're there, but we recognize that that's where we're headed. And we recognize that our kids are in that process. One of my sayings is, let's join our kids in the journey rather than rush them to a destination. This is what the process mindset does. It helps us to slow down. It helps us to be present in this moment and think, well, how can I be most effective in this moment in adding to their learning? Not that they have to learn the whole lesson in this moment, just adding to their learning in this moment. Because if we can add to their learning in this moment, even one piece in this moment, then we've created a new layer. We've created a new direction. It's kind of like martial arts when somebody is punching at, I'm a martial artist, I've been doing martial arts for over 30 years. When somebody's punching at you, if you try and block it force on force directly, it's very challenging. It's painful, it hurts your own arm, and it's only sometimes is it going to be effective. But if you can get into the movement of the person's punch and guide it away from you, which requires a lot less energy, it's a lot less movement, it's way more effective. So it's kind of like that. I don't need to change and stop the entire trajectory of this behavior in this moment. I just need to be able to guide it a little bit, to teach something a little bit, to impart something a little bit, But if we get to the habit of those little bits add up for sure. That's what SMABO is all about. Trusting in SMABO. SMABO stands for small moments affect big ones. And when we only deal with the big ones, we forget all the little ones, then we're in trouble, because then all the unconscious small moments lead to the big moments, which are perhaps beyond our control. So SMABO learning is very much like that too, SMABO process. And then we can slow down and we can take bite-sized pieces. And that's really helpful, it's really, really helpful. The reason parents resort to punishment and consequences and shame and coercive and forced boundaries and all those things is because they need to fix it in a certain time period. It's got to be fixed now. It has to be done now, And you'll see even in GPU, you'll see that advice from people all the time. And granted, it's 70,000 people, so people are at many different stages on their journey. But people who haven't quite let go of that mindset yet, they feel like they have to get it. It has to get done now, and so then that pressure. The only way to get something done that way now, like or at least the appearance of it, is with coercion, with force. But it always falls apart. Predictably, it always falls apart. That's why we're here doing this work, this hard, deep work, right? Because we know that we're setting up a foundation that's way more stable, way more sustainable through hard times, and way more resilient, having the capacity to come back from challenges and from difficulties. The next thing is to be able to zoom out. There's something I call the 10-year rule. The 10-year rule is when you imagine yourself telling the story of this moment 10 years from now. And what kind of story do you want to tell? And I love that. For me, I love that. I love using story as a way to guide story in the future, as a way to guide my present. I think it's a beautiful thing. And the way it came about was a number of years ago, I was helping a friend prepare for their black belt test. He was coming over to my house every day, every 2 or 3 days, and we were training, blood, sweat, and tears, and really working really, really hard. And I was very, very confident in their ability to pass their test. And it was a really involved, challenging test. And we had different teachers, but same art form, so I knew all the stuff, and I was able to help him. And I had my black belt for a number of years by this time anyways. And the day of the test, he came up to me and he said, "Vivek, I have the most splitting headache. It's debilitating me right now. And I don't know what to do. I feel like I want to take some ibuprofen, but at the same time I don't. I want to fight through it and do the test without it, but I also feel like I'll do a better job and be happier with my test if I do take it and the headache eases off." He said, "What should I do?" Now, of course, even like 15, 18 years ago, however long ago this was, I didn't like to tell people what to do. I like to give principles and ideas and let people make their own decisions. Except don't punish your kids. But but that I'll tell you what to do. But other than that, mostly I don't. So what I said to, and this is where the 10-year rule came to me. I said, Jason, think about 10 years from now, telling the story of your black belt test and how you did and what you did and the choices you made. What kind of story do you want to be telling? Imagine you're telling your students. Imagine you're telling your kids. What kind of story do you want to be telling? Imagine yourself telling that story. And what story is going to make you the proudest? What story is going to make you the happiest, the most fulfilled? And he stopped for a second, and he narrowed his eyes, and he looked right at me and he said, I know what I have to do. And he never told me, and I still to this day, I don't know what decision he made. He did a brilliant test. It was very exciting, and all of us were clapping him and on the back when he was done, and we all went out for noodles afterwards. And there was a place called Not Just Noodles right on the corner. And it was a wonderful celebration. And I still, to this day, I don't know, but I do know that the idea of looking to the future and thinking of himself in this moment from that perspective gave him so much clarity. And I was like, ooh, I got to remember that. And so in some of our hardest moments with our kids, when we don't know what's going on and we don't know what to do, and we feel this panic rising or feel the urgency rising, this is a moment to stop for a sec and just picture this moment and telling the story of it later on. And then try and act out that story. And I know that's a funny way to think, but it has a tremendous effect in those difficult moments if you can get yourself to that point. Now, to get yourself to that point requires the other stuff that I talked about: empathy and compassion, and having the process mindset, accepting the challenges of life and recognizing the context of it. And then we do the zooming out, looking at the broader context of number one, of the 10-year rule, thinking of this moment, and number two, of understanding our kids are in a process that's going to be going on for their whole lives, and with our direct influence, another 15, 20 years, we don't have to get it all solved right away. And to be able to have that more zoomed out, broader perspective. And, the self-compassion stuff doesn't only have to be when there's a catastrophe happening. It's something you can do every day. And I really highly recommend it. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you develop a more consistent, I say more because maybe you're doing it a lot, maybe you're not. But wherever you are, I'm going to suggest more. I always want more, like I say. I'm going to suggest more. Having a regular self-compassion process and deepening it all the time, practicing it all the time, increasing it all the time, finding different ways. That's why I have the micro self-compassion that I teach, which is just one sentence every now and then throughout the day, just reminding yourself that you love yourself. Reminding little you. I talk to little Vivek all the time. I was just telling Shivani yesterday about how I talk to little Vivek all the time and encouraging her to talk to little Shivani. I said, little Shivani needs your love. And especially when we didn't get the love that we needed when we were young, now we're the loving adult that can give it to ourselves, our little selves. So it's such a powerful thing. And not just in words, but in feeling and in physically too. We can hold ourselves. Sometimes I'll actually hold little Vivek in my arms. There's nobody there, but I imagine he's there, and I can feel that physically in my body being held. Sometimes I hold myself. I wrap my arms around myself. And when we do the body gratitude meditation, I suggest to people to actually hold themselves and to touch the different parts of their body as they're giving love to the different parts of their body, and to really feel it. And same with the self-compassion affirmation meditation, same thing. So please think about that. Think about how you can give yourself more self-compassion, more affirmations, more affection, more patience with yourself, more acceptance. And yes, it might sound artificial at first, and that's okay. Every new skill is artificial and awkward at first, and that's okay. The way to get from artificial awkward to natural and integrated is to keep practicing, to push through that awkward stage. One of my old one-liners is you have to lie to yourself before you can love yourself. And no, that's not the whole picture, but it is a good solid piece of the picture, because if we don't believe it and when we wait to believe it before we start doing it, we may never start doing it. So take the principle of it and work with the principle and let that become natural for you over time. And you'll notice it when you practice every day. It's like my juggling analogy, that if you don't know how to juggle and you practice for 5 minutes a day, after a year, for sure, you're going to be a better juggler than you were at the beginning of the year. And if you can't use your arms, then pick something other than juggling, but something like that, right? If you do it 5 minutes a day, you're going to get better at it for sure after a year, after 2 years. If your kid's 6, they're only going to be 8 2 years from now. That's a lot of practice you can do in that time. And wow, what a wonderful thing to spend 2 years giving yourself compassion at 5 minutes a day. That's a lot of compassion. And for sure that's going to make a difference. I can't stress enough how much that piece of it is so profound. But also all the other brilliant stuff I said too is really helpful. And take it to heart, because I think it's one of the most profound things we can do is being okay with things not being okay, with ourselves and with our kids, because then we actually become much more effective in working towards things being okay again. When we resist the not okayness, we rush, we force, we shame ourselves and the kids, and then it's just much harder. And please know that I believe in you, and I know that you can get through the hard times and build more resilience and build more capacity as you do. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to listen to this. It's a pretty intense topic, and I hope that what I shared was helpful.